Wildness. Wolves represent wildness. We got rid of wolves in North America to civilize the continent. And civilization couldn't occur if wolves were there.
It was a big risk in many ways to bring wolves back to Yellowstone.
The wolves came in January 1995. We didn't know if this was going to work. Those early years, there were a lot of question marks, a lot of nervousness, a lot of controversy. We really had to be deeply engaged. And so there was a bonding. You follow them through their lives.
We just were learning so much. We were seeing so much.
This is the stage, and you have these actors out there. Everything that wolves do, you see here.
Yeah, it's definitely canine tracks. You look at a wolf, and they live every day without knowing if they're going to live the next one. Every day to them is their last.
It's fascinating. Tell me a human story. Tell me a wolf story. I'm on the edge of my seat. Yellowstone by itself is always big theater, big news. And throw wolves in and it's, gigantic.
Doug Smith has been with Yellowstone's Wolf Project from the very beginning. He's spent over 20 years in the park, a place where wildlife rules.
So we've got a bison jam here, and so this is slowed progress. And so these bison don't look too concerned, so this might take a couple minutes. Jeez. Yeah, welcome to Yellowstone. We knew that this was going to be controversial. The surprising thing is that we're 20-plus years into this. It's still controversial. I thought people would have adapted to and gotten used to the presence of wolves. They haven't.
In the early 1900s, wolves were trapped, shot, and burned across the country until the last one was gone from the West.
We used to rever them as a hunter because we were hunters. And when we started husbanding livestock, they became enemies. This hatred of wolves is really deep-rooted. And I can't figure out because it is a hatred that's greater than other predators.
In 1926, the last wolf in Yellowstone was killed by the National Park Service. The absence of wolves changed the ecosystem, throwing the natural order out of balance.
Carnivores, for sure, have these strong top-down effects, and we had lopped off the top level.
With no wolves to hunt them, there were too many elk for the land to support. Hundreds starved to death each winter.
How can you have a natural system without North America's top carnivore?
In 1995, after almost 70 years without them, the first 14 wolves arrived from Canada to be released in the park.
Okay, don't drop her at all costs.
The wolves spent their first 10 weeks in pens to get used to their new home.
When I came on the scene, it was explosive, and it was like, this is a big deal. Nothing better go wrong. There's an old kind of saying around Yellowstone, you don't want to be the #1 issue. And I remember coming here, and the grizzly bear folks were like, thanks. You've taken heat off of us. It was a big deal.
The team had to make sure every wolf had a radio collar so they could track their movements once they're let loose.
Right here, Doug. Right here. Do it again.
All right, we got it. Finally.
The problem was we could control them when they're in the pens, but once we cut them loose, it's all up to them. And one thing we all know about wolves is they can travel. That's a lot of pressure. Are they going to go to the ranch that's 25 miles north of Yellowstone? One's out. One animal that died, one animal that left, one animal that reproduced could make or break the whole project. In the beginning, I knew them really well.
The radio collars allowed the team to follow the movements and the lives of individual wolves. Every wolf got a number to be known by.
We purposely don't name it because that humanizes the wolf, and we want them to be separate from humans, but we need to follow them. Every creature's got its story, and to tell a story, you gotta have a label. And so that's what the number does. It lets us keep track of that animal.
The wolves' return piqued the interest of expert researchers like Rick McIntyre, who came down from Denali to join Doug's team.
My goal for the summer season was to hopefully see one wolf, one wolf over the course of the summer. And my first full day here, I saw the entire Crystal Creek pack of 6 wolves, and we were seeing them pretty much every day.
I've been Rick's supervisor for over 20 years, and the best way to describe Rick is that he's unsupervisable. And he spins the best stories about wolves that anybody will ever tell, ever. No one could match it. And it's that combination of Rick's oddness, and I mean that in a good way, with thousands and thousands of hours of watching wolves, more than anybody in history.
While working in Yellowstone, Rick had a streak of seeing wolves every day for 891 days in a row.
To be there at that time in the history of Yellowstone was really a special moment, as it was Beatles-level hysteria when people were seeing the wolves. They would not only start crying because of the emotion of it, but they would start running toward me with the intent of hugging me because I would help them see wolves. If you're a government employee, it's not often that citizens want to hug you because they love you so much, but that's what it was like. It was Beatles-level hysteria.
Rick and Doug devoted their days to studying the wolves' behavior, but it was Bob Landis who would bring their stories to life.
Bob Landis has more footage of free-ranging wolves than anybody in the world. And we've used that stuff extensively to learn wolf behavior. That's been a hugely valuable resource for us.
I've been here probably in the park filming maybe 7,000 days. It's different. It's just like, this is the stage and you have these actors out there, but they're playing it. It's a different play every time. You never know. I get to know some individuals extremely well because it's over years of time, and so you feel a very deep emotion for them.
The pack that throughout the whole history of the wolves here at Yellowstone that always was the one that attracted the most attention was the Druid Peak pack. They, over others just had a story for us to witness that really changed our understanding of wolves. And they had certain members of their pack that almost were like figures from the Bible or the Civil War that just were giants on the earth. Wolf 21, there'll never be another wolf like him. In my opinion, he was the greatest wolf who ever lived.
Wolf 21 was part of the first litter of pups to be born in the reintroduction to Yellowstone. They were called the Rose Creek Pack.
We pretty much know his life story of 9 years from birth to death.
21 started life as a black wolf. The years would turn his coat to gray. When he was 2, like many young wolves, he left his family to find a mate and a new pack to call his own.
His whole joining of the Druid Peak Pack from Rose was one of the best stories of wolves. I mean, the whole thing was observed. Bob filmed it. It was one of the best documentations of how a wolf joins another pack.
I was out in the Lamar Valley, and I got a call on the two-way radio from a group of coyote researchers that told me that there was 2 wolves down the road that were interacting in a very strange way, something they hadn't seen before.
So wolves joining another pack when you're an adult is a risky undertaking. I mean, you could die, and so you don't do it unless you know there's a vacancy.
And they, for whatever reason, were very aggressive. They had killed a number of other wolves. So for him to make what at the time seemed to be a deadly mistake, just to walk right into the middle of their territory, seemed to be very foolhardy. But 21 always knew what he was doing, and we don't know how he had figured this out, but he arrived just after their alpha male, number 38, had been illegally shot and killed outside the park.
He stood away and howled and howled and howled and howled, and they howled back to him. And somehow I think he pieced together or sensed something that there's an opening there.
In watching Bob's footage, it was actually the pups that were really intrigued by this big guy coming into their territory. So they ran over to see what was going on.
These icebreaker pups kind of come out and do this split leg stance like, do you want to play? And of course, 21 never went for any of it because he's not in a mood to play. I mean, this is life or death for him. But that ice breaking, you know, that kind of, how do I say, you always need someone to just be themselves to get a situation to become normal, maybe crack a dumb joke. That allowed 21 to kind of inch forward, assess the situation there.
The females then started dancing around, much like a dog would dance around when it gets real excited.
So they ran over and they were all flirting with him at once. He was the George Clooney of wolves at that moment, surrounded by female admirers.
Then eventually, after a couple hours of this, they all just got together, and that was the beginning of 21's stay with that pack.
21 paired with a Druid alpha female, wolf number 40.
40 ruled in a very dominant, cruel way. There was no question watching that pack that she was in charge.
40, I hate to use the B word, but that's how we would look at anthropomorphically. She bloodied several of her sisters over fights.
One of the sisters, number 42, was a constant target.
42 had the exact opposite personality. She was very benevolent toward the other members of the pack. And so for years, she took the abuse. She took the constant beating up, the bullying.
42 remained submissive to her fierce sister until an unexpected role reversal.
Eventually, the two sisters had it out. It happened in the middle of the night, so no one witnessed it. But when we came out the next morning, we found 40, and she was drenched in blood.
Next morning, I get a call, a wolf on the side of the road that can barely walk. That was 40. And we didn't know what happened at first. Maybe a car hit her. If a car did hit her, we were gonna try and help her because that's unnatural. We get out there, we catch her, we put her in the back of the truck. It's just as we put her in the back of the truck, she died.
When we examined her, her whole body was full of wolf bites. We think what happened was that 40 did something to threaten her sister's pups at her sister's den site.
And her sister went to defend her pups, and there were a couple other females there, and they all ganged up on her and killed her. To this day, that's a one-of-a-kind event. But, you know, it was probably because she was such an aggressive wolf. And when you're an aggressive wolf like that, you gotta watch your backside all the time.
Now, the highlight of all that is that within a day, 21, the alpha male, goes over to the den of 42 and gets 42, and then 42 started taking her pups one by one, 3 miles back to 40's den. And she takes care of her sister's pups, raises them.
Between the 3 Druid females, an incredible 21 pups were born that spring.
We think if we knew the fate of every pup born in Yellowstone, maybe there'd be a 50% survival by the end of the year.
By the end of that year, 20 of the 21 pups were thriving, with 42 as their matriarch.
For 21, she was the queen, and he just served the queen. He was in charge of defending the family. That was his strength, and then doing the hunting and bringing back food. To organize things, get everyone to work together, that was her strength. So it was a perfect match. They were meant for each other.
The 20 Druid pups were the beginning of a historic pack led by 21 and 42.
They got to be 37 wolves, and that might be the largest wolf pack ever recorded.
That was the only alpha pair that could have done that, just due to the abilities that each one of them had.
They were the most known wolf pack worldwide, and thousands of people would come, especially in the summer, just to see them because they heard about them.
When I came here, the Druid Peak Pack was said with some level of awe or reverence. Watching wolves every day allowed people and us now to kind of get to know their personalities and watch them, you know, raise their young every year, their successes, their failures, and be able to get to know them as well as you can get to know any wild animal was a pretty incredible thing.
The Druids lived in Lamar Valley, one of the best wolf territories in Yellowstone. In winter, elk migrate down from higher altitudes in the park's interior, fueling a wolf pack's most vital activity, the hunt.
While they're hunting, it's usually the younger wolves that do the chasing to see which elk are going to be the appropriate ones to pursue. They have the most energy, they're really physically fit. Once the rest of the pack kind of chooses which one it is and then slows it down, it's oftentimes the largest males that will bring the animal down, usually grabbing the throat.
be like any human athletic team. Most of the time, there's only a few star players that score most of the points, but you need a whole team. In the days of 21, he would have been one of the star players.
He ruled that pack. That position was his without much struggle. And he was a good guy. Nobody wanted to take him on, really.
My all-time favorite wolf of all these different personalities is one called 302, which is a male that was born not too far from Mammoth and ended up all the way out in Lamar Valley one January day. We didn't know who he was at that time. He was black.
Wolf 302, in a way, was 21's nemesis, his opposite. Kind of like they had a relationship similar to Batman and the Joker. 21 was the epitome of masculine responsibility, dependability. 302, not so much.
302 was a lover, so he was looking for females. He just didn't know how to do it right.
During the mating season, 21's daughters would flock over to 302 when he came on the scene. .302 would just run far enough away to get away from 21 and then stand on a hill and howl, and poor 21 would have all of his daughters run past to go to the no-good boyfriend.
But even for 21, patience runs out.
And then 21 comes in and clobbers 302. And 21 should have killed him because that's the normal thing that a male would do, an alpha male. But let him up, and he ran away, and 302 came back again the same day and got pinned again. And he repeated that several times over the winter.
As far as we know, 21 never lost a fight in his life, but again, as far as we know, he never killed a defeated enemy. There's no end to what you can say about 21. But then again, 42, she was his equal.
The average life of wolves in Yellowstone is 5 years. 21 and 42 ruled the Druids together for nearly 7. When she was 8, 42 was killed by a rival pack called the Mollies.
21, not to read emotions into animals, appeared distraught. He returned from the site of, it was high up on Specimen Ridge. He returned and just, it was actually kind of sad. 21 howled for a couple days, just almost like he was looking for her.
He was never the same after that. And it took us a while, but we eventually found him. And he had walked way up to the top of a mountain to a place that he and 42 had probably been at hundreds of times. So by himself, he used the last bit of his great strength and energy to walk up there. And that's pretty much what happened within 4 months. As far as we know, he's the only wolf that we've ever had that was so tough, so strong that he not only lived twice as long as normal, but he died in his sleep. And that's where he wanted to be. I think that's where he had the best memories of his life.
Dozens of wolf packs have come and gone since their reintroduction to Yellowstone. Wolves live hard and fast lives. Battles over territory, disease, and early deaths can break a pack. After more than 2 decades, only one original pack stands.
We have one pack that was reintroduced in 1995, first year, that's still going.
The Mollies pack lives in Pelican Valley, deep in Yellowstone's interior.
That's pretty remarkable that Molly's is still going after all those years.
They were named after Molly Beatty, head of U.S. Fish and Wildlife at the time of the reintroduction. The key to the Molly's survival may lie in their unusual choice of territory.
They live unto themselves. And a lot of other packs in Yellowstone are living next to other packs, constantly having a yin and yang with them. And there's Molly in the middle, by themselves, bison eaters.
In winter, elk leave the high interior, leaving only the toughest animals behind. The Mollies have traded plentiful prey for uncontested land.
And they are really kind of this phantom pack that exists in Yellowstone that people don't see very often because they live in the center of the park.
This intrigued photographer Ronan Donovan.
I was brought onto a National Geographic magazine project in 2014 in Yellowstone and had the opportunity to cover wolves for that issue. I wanted to show wolves in Yellowstone at their wildest, and that was the pack to do it with.
But their wildness created a challenge. Because they live far from roads, the Mollies, like most wolves, are very wary of humans.
If the wind is right, wolves can smell humans from miles away. So you really have to be conscious of the wind and the terrain, and they have incredible eyesight, so they can see movement at great distances. So they're a really tricky animal to actually get close to if they don't want to be close. One of the best ways to get natural behavior is to use camera traps. You're not there as the human, you're not affecting their behavior.
Ronan looks to photograph the hidden lives of wolves throughout the Yellowstone ecosystem.
It's kind of this detective work that you do to go out and, in the wintertime you follow tracks and you're trying to discover what the animals are doing, and snow is amazing because you can literally read exactly what an animal's doing.
Yeah. These are some really good tracks in here. Oh. Yeah, it's definitely canine tracks. Looks like they're coming, maybe marking around this tree, and they lead up this trail. So this is definitely a used place. I might set up a camera here just to check it out and see what comes by. So what we do is we set this up, and I don't know this pack at all, so I'm trying to get them used to the camera. It's gonna smell like me, it's gonna look funny, and it's gonna take them probably a few weeks, if not more, to get used to it. Now I gotta check it, because there's this sensor right here that picks up any movement, and I just have to make sure that it works. Make sure that one's working. Okay, playback. It's pretty good. It's picking me up maybe about 30 feet away. All right, put it back in position.
Leave cameras out for weeks at a time, and you go and check on it, and you hope it pays off, and you hope you get something out of it.
Quick setup. At least that's the goal. Camera traps are mostly heartbreak. It doesn't work most of the time, but it's just that 5% of the time that it does that makes it worthwhile.
My favorite image from the Yellowstone project was an image of the big alpha female. She's on the right side of the frame, and she's standing there in the snow with two of her yearling offspring. So they've had to transition from hunting elk to taking down kind of these old male bison that'll be, weakened in winter, but still very strong and very dangerous to take down. So she is producing all of these bigger, stronger wolves, and it definitely looks like that when you see them all together, that they are big, strong wolves compared to some of the other packs in the park.
The Mollies are survivors, but even at its largest, this super pack only reached 19 wolves, around half the size of the Druid Peak pack at its prime. But there's a reason the number of Druids will likely never be matched. When the Druid Peak wolves were released into the park, there were nearly 20,000 elk in northern Yellowstone.
Right now, we're hovering around 7,000, and that seems more natural. There were more wolves because there were more elk.
More elk meant more food for pups.
So they quickly responded to this big food source. Now I think we're more in a phase of ecology, of wolves on the landscape and being part of the landscape.
Having wolves back on the land has changed it in a big way.
Restoring that top level has had subtle effects on everything below.
With few predators, the elk had overgrazed the natural vegetation. Today, it flourishes.
Insects, fishes, grasslands, all of these things are subtly altered. Everything in nature is usually subtly altered, but when it happens over lots of time, it becomes a big thing. 50 years ago, no one would have thought we'd be where we are now. Restoring wolves to Yellowstone, I think, was the last piece of the puzzle that restored this ecosystem, both biologically and ethically.
When the wolves were reintroduced, it was a compromise. They returned to a more populated West, and many ranchers were wary of a new threat to their livestock.
There were many people who feared that it would be the end of the livestock industry in Montana and Wyoming and Idaho to have these big predators back in the landscape, because there's this idea, this kind of myth about wolves being these vicious killers.
There's definitely a passionate constituency on both sides here, people who like to see wolves and people who would rather there aren't wolves here. And there's validity to both sides.
Gray wolves were protected on the endangered species list for the first 13 years after their reintroduction to Yellowstone. When their population grew across the West, things changed. Wolves are still protected in national parks, but once an animal leaves Yellowstone, it's on its own.
People have this idea that wolves and other wildlife, they're wild. Why do we need to manage them, right? The reality is that people have taken over these wild places. One of the goals is to create a situation where wolves and other predators can live alongside thriving human rural economies, and that's a challenge.
The single most important thing behind wolf management and recovery is human attitudes. The West is becoming more developed, and you got to go back and forth, hash these things out, and try and get something that you both can live with.
By 2012, it was legal to hunt wolves in all 3 states bordering Yellowstone. Each state monitors its own wolf and elk populations to decide how many animals can be hunted each year.
So right outside the park, there are 2 areas where we limit hunting, and those 2 areas are key travel corridors for the elk migration, and so wolves tend to follow the elk out of the park in the fall. It's kind of a tricky area because you have this human-created boundary that animals move back and forth across.
The annual elk migration from the park's interior can lead to danger for Yellowstone wolves.
I mean, it's something I have to live with. I get asked that a lot. Are you against wolf hunting? No, I'm not. I'm against it in the park, and the park needs to serve its function. But when the wolves leave, that's kind of a give and take that we're going to have to work out, and to a degree we have worked it out.
The number of wolves inside the park is stabilized at roughly 100 wolves each year for the last decade.
I think we have a saturated landscape. In other words, there's as many wolves as there can be. Occasionally, wolves that live primarily in the park are shot outside. That doesn't affect our population numbers.
The overall numbers may be stable, but those studying wolf behavior have seen the impact a key loss can have.
When a lead wolf gets killed, it's more destabilizing to the pack.
And studies are beginning to reveal the most dramatic effects are tied to a pack's lead female. The Druid Peak Pack lasted until 2010, 14 years after they arrived in Yellowstone. But their legacy would be carried on by an extraordinary female nicknamed 06 after the year she was born.
If we think of 21 as being the ultimate male wolf, and 42 certainly is pretty close to being the ultimate female, but if there was anyone that was at her level, it would be their granddaughter, and that would be the 06 female. She was very independent, very self-assured. By any standard, she was drop dead gorgeous. That's a biological term, by the way. All the boys wanted to court her. And one by one, because she had such high standards, she'd be with them for a little bit and then dump them. One of the best parts of her story, when she was the equivalent of middle-aged in human terms, like maybe someone in their, well into their 40s, she met someone. And he had a brother.
06 chose the smaller brother, 755, as her mate.
And with her being middle-aged, the fact that they were the equivalent of two brothers that were high school sophomores, it was really an amazing thing to see.
She became the sensation because, like a lot of males, humans included, they were just like whatever kind of guys, go with the flow, and she was a wolf with a mission.
She taught herself to be perhaps the greatest hunter we've ever had, and she needed no help.
She was always a wolf that stood out, but a wolf that took charge, you know, and 754 and 755 just went along with it.
With her mate 755 and his brother 754, the 06 female formed the Lamar Canyon Pack.
She was a great mother. She raised her first 2 litters, didn't lose a single pup during that whole time.
But 06's third litter of pups would be her last. In the winter of 2012, elk numbers were down in the park and food was scarce.
The last time I filmed 06 was in December of 2012. She was out in front of the Lamar Valley, and our youngsters were off chasing bison. She and the other adults were just kind of watching the whole thing. And then the chasers rejoined with the adults and then came toward the road. And that was the last time I saw her alive.
'06 took her pack across the eastern border of Yellowstone, following the elk out of the park.
She was always kind of fairly used to people, and so she didn't have this view of people as being something that was to be feared.
Outside the park, that's fatal. It allows for a good shot on them. A lot of people called saying that I didn't express enough outrage, and they thought I should resign. I got several calls like that, that I should have been more angered in the paper. She was legally shot by a hunter in Wyoming, and so that's part of having wolves back. Wolves' death is common in their world, so they've adapted to dealing with it, but we put a lot into it. I put a lot into it, you know? So it was a rough time.
When they lost their alpha female, things changed dramatically for that pack.
755 lost his partner and was forced to leave his pack. Wolves aren't built to go it alone, but to survive, 755 had no choice.
He kept going. It's like, I'm interpreting here, speculating, but shook his shoulders and said, gotta keep going. I get asked all the time, what's the lesson you've learned from wolves? Is, you know, they never feel sorry for themselves. I've seen wolves with broken legs, busted up teeth, and they go out and kill elk, you know, because that's what you do. And if they don't, they're not gonna make it.
With their leaders gone, the remaining wolves split off and went their separate ways. But this wasn't the end of the pack 06 built. One daughter remains in the valley, carrying on the legacy of the Lamar Canyon pack.
The wolves of today in Yellowstone, many of them have genetics of 21, of 42, the 06 female, even 302 flowing through them. Each one of them is going to have a story to tell.
And going through the gate in the morning, quite often I remember when the wolves came through the gate. And I filmed it, so I had no idea that that would be the beginning of filming wolves at Yellowstone. But I was really lucky.
We lived in such an artificial world. It's parking lots and plazas and conveniences, and that's what we're built on. And wolves are real, and they're wild. And you'll never get that out of a wolf. And we connect with that. I look at a wolf and I go, you're pure, you're unmolested, you live a real life. I need to do that too. And I think other people deep down see that as well. And that is the best reason to have restored wolves to Yellowstone, because they've helped us.